Napoleon is the kind of person who is really stewing his own ambitions.
Stone castle, very difficult to attack unless you have sophisticated siege weapons.
Clear that the Bonapartes, haven't got a great future.
The tides of empire clashed not on one battlefield, but across continents, oceans, and economic lines. At the heart of it all stood Napoleon Bonaparte, a master strategist determined to bring Europe under his banner. But one adversary stood firm: the British Empire. This was no ordinary rivalry, it was a relentless duel of ambition, power, and survival. While France surged across Europe with revolutionary zeal, Britain held the seas and struck back with gold, coalitions, and cunning. This is the story of how two empires collided and reshaped history. A republic forged in fire. The twilight of the 18th century saw France in turmoil, the old regime torn asunder by revolution, its monarchy decapitated, and its society reborn under the fiery ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Yet in the vacuum of power, a new order was waiting to emerge, one not of elected assemblies or citizen governance, but of military might and singular ambition. From the chaos rose Napoleon Bonaparte, a Corsican artillery officer whose meteoric rise would rewrite the map of Europe. Napoleon capitalized on a fractured post-revolutionary France, where instability bred opportunity. His military brilliance became evident in the Italian campaigns of 1796 to 1797, where he outmaneuvered Austria's seasoned generals and brought glory to the struggling French Republic. The Egyptian expedition in 1798, though strategically flawed, cemented his status as a national hero. In 1799, with France weary of war and political chaos, Napoleon seized power in a coup d'état, becoming first consul. By 1804, he crowned himself emperor, symbolizing not just the death of the old monarchy, but the dawn of a new imperial ambition. France, under Napoleon, became a behemoth that sought continental hegemony. But across the Channel stood a defiant island nation, rich, industrialized, and unrivaled at sea. The stage was set for an imperial rivalry that would consume Europe in fire and steel. The geopolitical rift. The hostility between Napoleonic France and Great Britain did not emerge from a single spark. Rather, it was the result of deep-rooted strategic, ideological, and economic conflicts. Britain, a constitutional monarchy with a burgeoning empire, viewed revolutionary and Napoleonic France as a threat to its global interests and internal stability. France, on the other hand, saw Britain as the last major obstacle to its dominance on the European continent. Their enmity was further exacerbated by colonial competition in the Americas, India, and the Caribbean. Britain's naval power gave it control of sea routes and trade, while France's vast land army dominated the continental battlefield. Ideologically, Napoleon's expansionism was cloaked in the rhetoric of liberation, but in practice, it often resembled conquest. Britain, determined to contain this rising hegemon, financed coalitions of European powers to resist French aggression. War was not a matter of if, but when. The Battle of Trafalgar. By 1805, Napoleon had amassed a vast army on the French coast, poised to invade Britain. However, the English Channel stood in his way, guarded by the Royal Navy. For his invasion to succeed, Napoleon needed temporary naval supremacy, something he hoped to achieve by drawing the British fleet into a trap. The Franco-Spanish fleet, under Admiral Villeneuve, was tasked with luring the Royal Navy away from the Channel long enough for the French invasion force to cross. But off the Cape of Trafalgar on October 21, 1805, Britain struck a devastating blow. Commanded by Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson, the British fleet launched an audacious assault that broke all conventional naval tactics. Rather than engaging in a line of battle parallel to the enemy, Nelson divided his fleet into two columns and cut through the Franco-Spanish line, creating chaos. The result was overwhelming. 22 enemy ships were captured or destroyed without a single British loss. Nelson, struck by a sniper's bullet during the battle, died before hearing the full scope of his victory. The Battle of Trafalgar was more than a triumph of tactics. It sealed British naval supremacy for a century and shattered Napoleon's hopes of invading Britain. From that moment onward, the sea belonged to the Union Jack, the continental system. Unable to defeat Britain through direct invasion, Napoleon turned to economic warfare. In 1706, he introduced the continental system, a vast embargo intended to strangle British trade by closing European ports to British goods. The Berlin and Milan decrees forbade any allied or conquered territories from trading with Britain, aiming to collapse its economy through isolation. But this strategy, though bold, was flawed. Britain, with its superior navy, countered by blockading French and Allied ports, further cutting off European trade. More crucially, Britain found new markets in Latin America, India, and beyond. Its global empire allowed it to weather the storm, while the European continent, especially countries like Spain, the Netherlands, and Russia, suffered under the strain of lost commerce and shortages. Smuggling thrived, discontent brewed. Even Napoleon's allies began to defy the system, leading to diplomatic rifts and rebellions. Britain's countermeasures and the cracks in the empire. Britain responded to Napoleon's economic warfare with both naval might and financial muscle. Its blockade of continental Europe not only undermined the continental system, but also ensured that Britain could continue funding its allies. British gold bankrolled coalition after coalition. Austria, Prussia, Russia, Spain, and Portugal all took up arms at various times, sustained by British subsidies. These efforts were not in vain. In Spain, British intervention under General Arthur Wellesley, later the Duke of Wellington, turned the tide in what became the Peninsular War. French forces, bogged down in guerrilla warfare and British offensives, suffered devastating losses. The Iberian Peninsula became Napoleon's Spanish ulcer, bleeding resources and morale. Further east, the failed Russian campaign of 1812, spurred in part by Russia's withdrawal from the continental system, marked a turning point. Napoleon's Grande Armée, over 600,000 strong, was reduced to a shattered remnant by winter, scorched earth tactics, and Russian resistance. Clash of empires. From 1703 to 1815, Britain and France stood on opposite ends of nearly every major European conflict, locked in a struggle that would engulf the continent. While France dominated the land with its formidable armies, Britain played a crucial role as financier, diplomat, and naval powerhouse. Over time, its military contributions on the ground became increasingly significant, particularly in the Peninsular Campaign and at sea. One of the pivotal early moments was the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, where Napoleon secured his most brilliant victory by defeating the combined Austro-Russian forces. Though Britain was not directly involved, the scale of the French triumph pushed Britain to support the formation of new anti-Napoleonic coalitions. The Peninsular War 1808 to 1814 marked a turning point, as British forces under Arthur Wellesley, alongside Spanish and Portuguese allies, gradually expelled French troops from Iberia through a combination of conventional warfare and persistent guerrilla resistance. In 1813, at the Battle of Leipzig, known as the Battle of Nations, Napoleon faced a catastrophic defeat at the hands of the Sixth Coalition, opening the road to France for invading Allied armies. Finally, in 1815, after his dramatic escape from exile on Elba, Napoleon's ambitions were crushed at the Battle of Waterloo, where British and Prussian forces under Wellington and Blucher dealt the final blow to the French Empire. These conflicts, one after another, bled France dry while elevating Britain as the enduring force of opposition. Though Napoleon ruled more land, it was Britain that commanded the seas, steered European diplomacy, and ultimately shaped the outcome of the age: the redrawing of Europe. The Napoleonic Wars left Europe scarred but transformed. The Congress of Vienna, 1815, dominated by Britain and its allies, sought to restore balance and prevent another continental upheaval. Monarchies were reinstated, borders redrawn, and the concert of Europe established to maintain the peace. For Britain, the outcome was a golden age of imperial expansion and industrial growth. With its chief rival vanquished, it emerged as the preeminent global superpower, unchallenged at sea and increasingly dominant in colonial affairs. The Royal Navy, hardened by decades of war, became the world's enforcer. France, though defeated, retained much of its revolutionary legacy. The Code Napoleon spread across Europe, and nationalism, stirred by Napoleon's campaigns, would later ignite independence movements and the eventual unification of Germany and Italy, the long duel that shaped an era. Napoleon's feud with the British Empire was more than a war between two nations. It was a battle between ideologies, economies, and empires. It redefined military strategy, transformed diplomacy, and laid the groundwork for the modern state system. Britain's maritime dominance and economic resilience ultimately outmatched Napoleon's brilliance on the battlefield. The clash between Napoleon and the British Empire wasn't just a battle for dominance. It was a struggle that redefined the fate of nations and the shape of modern Europe. If you found this journey into imperial conflict as fascinating as we did, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest power struggles.